teachers can use DIBELS data or put DIBELS data directly into a student map and bypass the need for a separate spreadsheet doing all the calculations, composite scores or error rates or accuracy rates. Alongside that, they can use the same student map to capture other classroom-based assessment data.
You're listening to Around the School Table, hosted by me, Steve Davis, and proudly powered by Xuno Suite. We'll be bringing together the many voices shaping primary and secondary education across Australia, from principals and teachers to education thought leaders and system innovators. Whether you're in the classroom, the staff room, or the boardroom, this is your podcast to be informed, inspired, and connected. Today on Around the School Table, we're sitting down with Anthony Sacker, Senior Leader at Xuno Suite and a driving force behind the innovative Student Maps platform. Anthony's here to demystify DIBELS. It's a key early literacy assessment, and show how smart data visualization is actually transforming the way teachers identify and support students who need help faster and more collaboratively than ever. And we'll discuss everything in this next chat, from the proper way to say that term to how Student Maps brings clarity and action to complex assessment results, making powerful insights accessible for whole teams. Now, if you're keen to understand how technology can simplify literacy assessment and make targeted intervention easier in your school, then this conversation is for you. Anthony, welcome to Around the School Table.
Thank you, Steve. Nice to be here.
Today we're going to talk about this assessment of, among other things, pronunciation. So let's start with how the heck you pronounce this. Is it DIBELS or DIBELS, or is the B silent? What's going on?
It's DIBELS. It's like cheesy dibbles, but without the cheesy bit. So it can be DIBELS. Some people pronounce it that way, but generally schools and educators pronounce it DIBELS.
As in you're having nibbles after school, but it's DIBELS.
Exactly right. And it stands for Dynamic Indicators of Basic Early Literacy Skills.
What does that actually mean?
So DIBELS is an assessment out of the University of Oregon, and it's used around the world as an assessment. They're basically short fluency assessments that are used to detect risk and monitor the development of early literacy and early reading skills and provide early intervention should there be issues. It is a very reliable assessment, and it is being used in more and more schools around Australia. And in fact, many departments of education, so at the top level, are instituting this in many schools around the country because of its accuracy and speed of identification as well.
Now, if I understand this correctly, and you notice I'm going to have to read this, Anthony, don't hold it against me, phonemic awareness, alphabetic principle, fluency with connected text, vocabulary, comprehension. Now, I'm a former radio host, so this actually seems pretty relevant. I wish someone had done this with me in the past. I've got that in common with the learning of a primary school student. So, in a nutshell, how does a teacher actually use DIBELS to test?
Usually the testing is based on different year levels. So you obviously have different assessments for different year levels because students are all at different ages and skills. And essentially a teacher would download the DIBELS testing material from the DIBELS website, possibly print them out as well, and use them in the classroom sitting with children who are performing all these assessments. So there are items like, well, as you've said, there's word identification, how quickly and clearly a student can recognize and pronounce a word. Then there are areas of nonsense word identifications, like a word like NOP or LUT, where the teacher is working out how well a student can identify words that they aren't familiar with as well. There are areas of reading passages, how well a student is reading through a particular passage, how they're pronouncing the words, how they're joining the words, how they're putting the correct inflections in place as well. And there are also phonetic assessments as well, where different words are broken up into its different phonetic sections, and then teachers basically write down how well a student is doing, how many of the words they identified correctly, how many they were pronounced correctly. And all this information is then gathered into a score sheet for that student that then determines which areas they're stronger in and which areas they're weaker in based on some fairly complex calculations that happen behind the scenes. Part of the calculations allow the accuracy rate of what a student is reading to be calculated, and then composite scores are calculated as well with some fairly complex calculations that are provided by the DIBELS team to be able to work out student progress over time. So DIBELS is usually done 3 times throughout each year, and that allows teaching staff to step in early if a student is showing difficulty in some of these areas. Not just students who are having difficulty, but students who are doing very well. We don't just want to focus on kids that are having problems, but we want to be able to identify students who are exceeding benchmarks and then step in to give them some extension work so that they are not getting bored and lose interest in schooling as well. So there are many, many benefits to all these different types of testing so that teachers can identify these student needs early on.
I really am not happy that this wasn't around when I was growing up. This would have been fantastic because it's not just a B, C blunt tool. It is diagnostic. It allows nuance, which would be a great word to test using DIBELS. It'd be great to get that nuance. That must be satisfying to be someone who is making the job a little easier for educators to actually extract all the value out of it.
That's exactly right. And many schools are not just using DIBELS as a diagnostic assessment. There are many other assessments out there as well that a school would use alongside DIBELS. There's something called the cadence, which is very maths focused. You have all your regular assessments that schools would do throughout the year. There is obviously NAPLAN around Australia. There is PAT testing provided by the Australian Council for Educational Research. There are other assessments in the classroom, other formalized assessments. And what many schools struggle with is bringing all this data together. And sometimes they just create spreadsheets that has some DIBELS, some NAPLAN, some PAT, some Australian curriculum data. And that is usually quite a manual process. So certainly one of our products allows the data to be centralized and tracked over time. And many schools are finding that very useful because it is a predictable location, it's a predictable operation, and it can be used year after year as well.
I actually want to dive into that. Just before I do, I can't help it. There was a wonderful comedy skit by Stan Freberg, an American radio announcer from many years ago. I think he was in the 50s, where he had a moderator from the Parents Society listen in to him singing Old Man River and correcting his grammar every step of the way. Does any part of you wish someone was operating a DIBELS test on our standard FM breakfast announcers in radio? Because I think they would be really having a field day.
FM, AM, television, internet, you name it. I think there are many presenters that can use some training and improvement, or at least identifying, areas where they're not actually at the level that's required.
And it also occurs to me, and I'll get back on to where we're going in a moment, is listening to texts like Shakespeare in this day and age. What I love from what you've picked up is something like DIBELS gives the reader some credit for the fact that the text is dense or going to be more challenging than just reading something that's been written in a very plain way. Again, that word nuance comes to the fore.
Correct. You really never know how deep you need to go into some of this text. And having certainly at the young ages, early learning, correcting every mistake that you may make certainly would stand these students in good stead for their later years, and not just in school, but obviously, during their careers.
So let's come to how different schools are finding ways to make this easier, because the way you described it, it's intense. The teachers need to be paying great attention and capturing this data, and I know that the traditional way to interrogate the data has been by actually paying for a subscription to the creators of DIBELS, the University of Oregon, and use an Excel spreadsheet, etc. Both of which would make it challenging to collaborate when you're going. I'm working with some schools at the moment, and there's great cross-collaboration between faculty members. So I think that brings us to student maps, which has popped up once or twice on around the school table. How does student maps play a role in facilitating the use of something like DIBELS?
Well, that's an excellent question. Student Maps is our data analytics platform, and it is a platform that kind of looks like a spreadsheet. And that's obviously been done on purpose, because then it's very easy for people to learn how to use. But what it does is brings all this data together. So imagine at a school you have a teacher who has Excel knowledge, and they can create formulas and color coding of data and so on. They can create a spreadsheet where teachers upload their DIBELS scores, upload NAPLAN data, copy and paste information. That's got a number of problems on its own, not least of which is that one person leaves the school and all the knowledge in how that spreadsheet works goes with them. It also makes it difficult to share the data, to graph the data, to compare student outcomes to expected levels or benchmarks. And with the Student Maps platform, it does all of that in a very easy to use interface, because it looks a bit like a spreadsheet. Highly, highly customizable. Any type of assessment can be used, but in the context that we're talking now, teachers can use DIBELS data, or put DIBELS data directly into a student map and bypass the need for a separate spreadsheet doing all the calculations, composite scores or error rates or accuracy rates. Alongside that, they can use the same student map to capture other classroom-based assessment data. They could be other reading assessments or artworks or maths data, pretty much anything that you want. It can be used as a markbook in the classroom and as a storage platform for all your external assessment data, like your PAT, like your Acadians, like NAPLAN, like Australian or Victorian curriculum data. And teachers who use this absolutely love it, because they only have one place to go the entire year to find all the data they need. So they can look at previous year's data in those same maps. They can look at school-wide data, individual student data, year-level data, cohort data. And the real kicker here is that all of this data, regardless of what the test type is, whether it's DIBELS or NAPLAN, can all be graphed so that visually teachers can identify very easily students or groups of students or whole year levels who are falling behind or zooming ahead of the expected achievement levels. And therefore, they can target their teaching in the right areas. You may have students that don't need remedial work but need extension. This will identify those students quite easily. And because this can be used year after year, including for purposes like handovers at the start of a new year, many schools are finding it hugely useful to say at the start of, say, year 5, your year 5 teachers can look at their new students' data from the end of the previous year and see, well, this student struggled in letter name identification in DIBELS, but they did really well in NAPLAN reading, but struggled in maths, for example. And by putting all this information in one place at the teacher's fingertips, it is almost a game changer for teachers, because there's no need to jump to different sources for this information. It's all in one place, and DIBELS is a big part of that.
So that scenario is the handing of the baton at the end of the year for the next year group teacher. But I imagine, tell me if I'm wrong, if I have a student and you have a student, would this make it easy for us both to be, through the current year, having a look and checking on progress. Even if it's not my direct discipline, there might be something that overlaps. I imagine drama teachers and English teachers having some similar keen interests.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, one of the limitations of Excel usually is that only one person can manage it at a time. One person can open it at a time. But you're absolutely right, Steve. You may have a specialist teacher working with a student and the classroom teacher working with a student and a subject teacher working with a student. And they all need to see the same data because it's going to affect their teaching or their instruction. So bringing it all together and having it accessible to any number of different staff members means that all the information you need is right there. And often the principal may be looking at a much wider set of data compared to a classroom teacher or an individual subject teacher. And Student Maps allows you to kind of chop and change, share this data across different maps, across different users, and addresses that problem exactly where you have multiple people working with one student.
Still juggling forms the old-fashioned way? Say hello to Student Forms by Xuno. You can create, collect, and manage all your student forms online in one simple, secure platform. Save time, stay organised, and quick access everything you need anytime. Visit xuno.com.au and see how Student Forms by Xuno can work for your school.
You touched on graphing before. Is there a way, orally, that you can paint a picture for us of what some graphs or that sort of visualization might look like?
Yes. Well, imagine you've got a Excel spreadsheet, for example, with student names down the side in your class and another column in that spreadsheet of test results, A, B, C, D, E, or percentages or composite scores and so on. The ability to visualize that data is twofold in Student Maps. Firstly, the data itself can be color-coded. So a score that shows up automatically in red indicates perhaps a student who's below the expected level, and something in green would be a student who's above the expected level. Something in amber could be at expected level. You can set any number of different levels that you want. But once you click a button in Student Maps that says graph this data, it then takes that set of results and will display it in any of, I think there's about 10 different versions or formats of graphs that you can use. One would be just a comparison of results, compare each student in that list to the other. Another one would be a distribution of results. How many students are at an A, B, C, D, or E, and who are those students? A third one would be a progress over time that you can say, all right, I want to see how this individual student has been tracking in this particular test over the past 2, 3, 4 years. And it can graph that against the expected levels, as well as graphing on the same graph how the whole year level has gone over that same time period. So you're now giving teachers visibility of data that would be almost impossible time-wise to consolidate into one view by using Excel or other manual processes. And so with these graphs, you can have, for example, a whole screen of 5 or 6 or 7 different sets of results, all with different graph views. They can be saved as kind of dashboard views as well. So teachers basically just sign in and everything they need is shown in graphical format as they sign into the program. They don't have to go and choose their own data and choose their own graph methods. We've tried to make it as easy as possible for teachers to get a visual representation of the data because it's always much easier to understand. Imagine you've got a whole screen full of numbers that aren't color-coded or aren't graphed, far more difficult for teachers to understand which students are below, at, or above the expected levels and which students need intervention, early intervention or extension as well. But as soon as you add color and graphs to otherwise fairly static data, it just brings it all to life and makes teachers' lives much easier.
I'm also thinking of career counsellors and those vocation discussions, year 10, year 11, etc., being able to hear what a student might be interested in and looking back to correlate that visually with different strengths and weaknesses that might map to that sort of career would be very helpful, as well as the other way around. I don't know what I want to do. Well, let's have a look at where your strengths lie. Sometimes this mirror being held up sees things that aren't front of mind.
Yeah, well, that's an excellent point. I hadn't actually thought of that, Steve, but you can imagine that a career counselor is sitting in front of a student map that shows that student's English, math, science, geography results over the past few years. And the student may be saying, you know what, I really want to be a journalist. And then they're looking at their English outcomes and saying, well, you haven't spelled the word correct in 5 years, for example, or you can't put a sentence together. And here's the proof because there's a comment in the student map from your English teacher that says, perhaps journalism is not the right, the right career for you. But conversely, if someone, as you say, is looking at the data and the student sitting in front of you saying, I don't know really what I want to do, if the data says, well, you're a great writer, or you're a great math student, or you're a great, accountant student, it could prompt those types of suggestions.
Yeah. Just on that, though, I mean, you've been working with Xuno Suite for over a decade, and you've led to development of the student maps. I've just thought about vocation, particularly in relation to DIBELS and all this other data, but what else? While I've got you here, because we don't often get a chance to talk to you inside the inner sanctum, what else can student maps do? What are some things that a teacher listening in or a principal might go, oh, I didn't realise that?
So student maps has got a few different areas of interest. So I've obviously described the data analytics. Certainly if you're considering things like NAPLAN or PAT data, which are external assessments, that data can be imported very easily. We don't want teachers to be re-entering information that already exists elsewhere. But on the student map side of things, the handover maps are actually a really big feature. Schools are loving this because it puts all the data in one place and also allows teachers to put things like comments in. So, don't sit little Johnny with little Mary, or the student works better with headphones on, for example, and that can be part of a student map. Part of the student map as well can be attachments. So if you've got photographs of student artwork or uploaded essays or handwriting examples, those can all be included in the student maps and referred back to year after year. You can also use student maps to show a single student's data for parent-teacher interviews. So you can imagine when parents come in and say, well, how's my child doing? You can bring up all the data in one view and show the parents, well, they're doing well in maths, they're struggling a bit in English, but all these other areas are doing really well. As part of the Student Maps platform, there is a module called Student Forms, and Student Forms allow schools to set up their own documents, which are used for individual education plans or disability inclusion plans or individual learning plans, student support group meeting notes. And for many schools, having these individual plans alongside all the assessment data means that they can refer to the data when they're setting up an individual plan. So if a student is having difficulty with spelling, for example, there could be an IEP or individual education plan set up just to improve their spelling outcomes. And so this will be an individualized plan that the teacher sets up that says, these are the steps that we're going to institute with the student to improve their spelling, for example. And you can see their spelling outcomes in the map before the learning plan was implemented. And then after the learning plan was implemented or completed, you can see if there is actually an effect in terms of the teaching that's taken place to improve those outcomes. So those kind of forms form part of the Student Map platform, and obviously schools can choose to use it or not, but it makes sense to have, again, all that information in one place so teachers know where there's a predictable location to find them.
And the other side of that, of course, is if I'm a teacher who's been putting these special plans together, I now have data so that when I go to have my interview for a promotion, I can say, hey, look, I say I do this and I actually do.
Exactly right. And all the evidence is there, all the proof is there, and the forms, the forms can be viewed by whoever's got permission to access them, but they can also be set up so that more than one person can update them at a time. So if you have a classroom teacher putting in their classroom observations and student goals and achievements towards those goals, you may also have a specialist teacher that's working with that same student that can update that same individual plan simultaneously. So very, very flexible and very useful having these forms year after year in one place.
If I've done badly, of course, I can't hack the system, can I?
No, you can't.
No, I didn't think so.
And the data doesn't lie, and that is something that teachers say all the time. The data doesn't lie. because if you have data, it is telling you the story. It's not subjective. And collecting data, schools collect data. They do tests all day, every day. Not all day, every day, but frequently enough that they are often overloaded with data. If you're not using those test outcomes to identify where students need attention, then there's no point to doing the testing.
Yeah.
And
Good.
that's one thing that we put in place quite often.
Good point. Anthony, before I let you go, if there's a teacher who wants to test out student maps on their DIBELS assessments, is there a trial?
Yes, we have trials available. And what this means is teachers or schools can just contact us and say they just want to, kick the tires for a week or two. We will set them up with a testing database with test data in there, including the DIBELS assessment, and they can play around with it, see how the graphs work, see how the data entry works. And there's even some other data in there like NAPLAN and PAT that they can play around with.
Anthony Sacker from Xuno Suite, thank you very much for joining me around the school table.
Thanks very much, Steve. Enjoy the rest of the day.